And thanks for joining us here on PM Express. In the last 24 hours, the news has been dominated by one address, the presidential address, the first since the economic crisis started. And yesterday, the president confirmed that indeed we are in deep economic crisis. He would not underestimate how bad this is. And he went on to say a lot of things, including some interventions to try and stem the bleeding in the interim. Well, tonight you've heard a lot from, across the board on reactions to the president. We are going to do a special show that looks at it from the political angle, from the economic angle, from the civil society angle. And then at the end of it, the second part, we will have a one-on-one conversation with the information minister who can then address all the key issues emerging from the first part. So we intend for this to be a very comprehensive conversation here on PM Express. So come with me. Let's assume that you still haven't heard what the president had said. So let me quickly run through for you some of the highlights of what he said last night. And I want to start with what many people were looking forward to. The president agreeing that, yes, we are in an economic crisis and that the budget that was planned for this year has completely been thrown out of kilter because of the current economic crisis that we're in. He talks about that quite emphatically. Now, on the back of that, the president also then indicates what they've been doing. One is the 30% cut in budgeted discretionary expenditure, which means that some of the things that the government will be spending monies on, 30% of that is off, including cuts in salaries for ministers, MMDs, ECs, etc. We'll be interrogating this a bit more because we've heard this before. This is not new. And so the key question to ask is, what has become of the cuts and how do we verify same is one of the key things we'll talk about. Then what the president talks about, what you see behind me there. And he then draws essentially on the economic situation elsewhere, comparing ourselves to our neighboring countries. One of the things that you've been talking about is about inflation, how prices are changing quite rapidly on the markets. When you go, you simply cannot afford anymore. Remember, 2 months ago, we did a special show from the markets here on PMS, where I went to the market, did a 1 hour conversation with a whole host of market women, butchers and customers who had come into the marketplace to buy. And one of the things they were telling us, what I found myself on the ground, is that prices were changing quite rapidly. The president says this is not unique to us, and that if you go to Togo, inflation had gone up 16-fold. If you go to Senegal, it's gone up 11-fold. If you go to Cote d'Ivoire, 7-fold. But I asked my research decks to do something for me, right? Because when the president talks about this, it doesn't give you the real picture, right? Keeping them honest. Yes, it's true, 16-fold, 11-fold, 7-fold, even though we find that the jumps aren't consistent with the reality on the ground. But the president, let's agree that he was right with this. But if you drill down to the specifics, you find that the jumps the president talks about, the increase, the fold increases, doesn't compare at all to what we are witnessing locally. And I want to demonstrate that for you with that graph that you see there on your screen. And I want to highlight for you what we are talking about here. Because if you look at Ivory Coast, the president mentions, Ivory Coast inflation has jumped, yes, but it's at 6.3%. That's it here. 6.3%. Togo has gone up, yes, but it's gone up from 0.7% to 7.9%. Yes? If you go to Senegal, yes, it's gone up, right? Just significantly, but still, it is just from 1.8% to 11.9%. Now let's come to the mother of all inflations, which is Ghana. It is 7.1%, and if you even look at it from the base where it used to be, we are now talking about 37.2%. So there's no way that the comparison compares. There's no way that these countries that the president mentions to make his case that everybody else in the sub-region is feeling inflation compares to our reality. If you draw that line, this is a cliff in terms of that comparison. So this is just to give you a picture. Whereas the president is true that there's been significant jumps in inflation across the sub-region, if you drill down to the specifics, you begin to see that ours is a complete outlier, right? And that's the question that many have been asking. Now, why is it that all these countries are facing the same challenges the president talks about yesterday? They face the pandemic, they are facing Ukraine. And how come ours is 37.2% and theirs, the highest you've seen in Senegal, is 11.9%? Somebody needs to explain that. We'll go into that pretty shortly. Now, also, the fuel price hikes is a key thing. Tonight, the oil marketing companies, they are confirming to us that from tomorrow morning, you should expect to buy the cheapest petrol will cost you 17 cedi a litre from tomorrow. In fact, if you check around, some of the stations have already begun selling this as of tonight. Now, so clearly the president yesterday when he spoke was mindful of that challenge. And so he announced that, and this for me is very central to the conversation we're going to have tonight. Because if the president pulls this off, it's going to be one of the biggest miracles for us. And it will be a good miracle. Because they say they're going to work to secure reliable, like this. And then the most important one is affordable petroleum products for the Ghanaian markets. How is the government going to do this in this global economy where we know international crude oil prices, we know, have gone up? And if you watch and listen to the international markets, Shell and Co are announcing big profits, billions and billions in excess. Why? Because crude oil price. So where is the government going to get affordable petroleum products from? And reliable. But we wish they can do this, but we need to ask hard questions. That is our job, and that's what we'll do tonight when Information Minister joins us. We want to believe our government, and that's why we need to hold their feet to the fire, break it down for us. And then the key question about debt also emerged last night, because as we see on the screen here, one of the biggest announcements, I must say, is this announcement that there will be no haircut. And this first emerged because Bloomberg on the 20th of September did a story that really sent shockwaves across the markets, that government was intending to do a restructuring that will include haircuts on principals. And this was the 20th of September. 3 days later, Fitch then did a downgrade of our debt, and Fitch referenced the Bloomberg story, the press reports, and said government had failed to clarify, confirm, or deny, and so they factored that into a downgrade. So the president yesterday said, forget, there's not going to be a haircut. But let's see if the reality backs that story the president had said. Because if you look at it, our debt currently in dollar terms stands at 53.2 billion. And if you break that down, you get external debt of 28 billion and then domestic of 25 billion. And total, it's, if you look at the percentage-wise, the external debt is 52.6%, the domestic is 47.4%. Question is this unsustainable? Yes. If you ask the World Bank will tell you this is currently unsustainable. In their report that was released just this month, they talk about the fact that we are now high distress, and they are predicting our debt to go over 100% to GDP by the end of the year. So clearly, that debt is not sustainable. But listen to what the IMF says. When a country's debt is unsustainable but is seeking a bailout. And for me, this is key, because it tells us what we can expect. This is the IMF, and this is the IMF Q&A on Ghana. And I want to quote, in cases where a country's debt is assessed as unsustainable, the IMF is precluded from providing financing. But this is key. Unless the member takes steps to restore debt sustainability, including seeking a debt restructuring from its creditors. So if you juxtapose this with the president saying there's not going to be a haircut when your debt is unsustainable, somebody must explain and reconcile the IMF position, the World Bank's conclusion that our debt is unsustainable, and the president's assertion last night that there's not going to be a haircut. Well, does a haircut necessarily mean restructuring? Are both the same? We'll get some clarity on that when we sit down. And so, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we're going to be joined by a few people. We're going to be joined by the Vice President of Imani, who's going to be first, indeed, speaking to us on his assessment of what the President has said. That is Bright Simmons, who's joining us via Zoom. And then we'll also have in the studio Dr. Kojo Asante. And Kojo Asante was at the press conference, one of the voices from the citizens, the coalition of citizens who came together, civil society groups, voicing a lot of issues. And they had so many issues that they were expecting that the president, at least the government, will tackle as part of dealing with the economic crisis. I wonder if they found any in what the president announced yesterday. Of course, a man who was there when Ghana went through a crisis in 2013, 2014, 2015, Deputy Finance Minister then, Kaysel Atofosing, is also with me in the studio. That's the first part. And in the second part, Kojo Nkrumah, having listened to all the assessments coming through, will also join us here in the studio for a one-on-one conversation. I get to put to him everything else that you hear in the analysis in the next few minutes. So stay with me. After the break, we'll get into the details. Thank you very much for staying with us here on PM Express. Let's get straight to it, shall we? I am joined in the studio by Dr. Kojo Asante, of course with the CDD, but he is a leading voice in the Citizen Coalition, and they are a collection of individual voices, activists in the CSO space, representing many organizations. They come together, obviously, in times like this to give a voice to the voiceless. That's what CSOs do. And he's joining me in the studio. And I invited him because this last week there was a major press conference that they did on the economic issues, and they laid out their own, what they expected the government to do to ease our collective pain. He's in the studio with me to assess the president's address last night within the context of what they themselves have put forth. And Dr. Kaysel Atofosing, he's here because he's the closest himself and maybe Seth Tekwe, closest to giving us a sense of a place we've been before and now. And he's had the president yesterday. I wonder what he makes of what the president said and whether that will deal with the problems that we are facing. And Bright Simmons will join us pretty shortly on Zoom also. And as I said, that will be part one. Part two, Kojo Nkrumah will be in the studio for a one-on-one on the back of everything you've heard tonight. Dr. Kojo, let me start with you. Last week, as I said, you put forth your list of issues. Pretty detailed. I know a lot of this, it was actually everybody contributed to this. And then you heard the president yesterday. There was an anticipation. I mean, I personally was listening to the president. I was really expectant, because of where we are. And he himself sort of set the stage by saying this current crisis is none like any
That's right.
we've experienced. And then you had him in the context of what you had read out last week. I think it was Thursday, was it?
Yes.
Did he meet your expectation?
Well, thank you, and good evening to your viewers and your listeners. Let me provide a quick context, just to kind of understand where we're coming from. So you have a political problem, and you have, or your governance problem and economic problem. I think those are the two objectives that the government should be trying to address. The political problem is really about credibility and trust. So for a long time, there was this gap between the leadership of our country and the crisis that was going on. Mm. And then it kind of built up, and then we got to a point where the president indicated, now I'm going to speak, or even started meeting stakeholders and so on and so forth. Now, if you look at Afrobarometer survey, the more recent one, round 9, the president trust rating is 30%. It's the lowest since the Afrobarometer started in 1999. Okay. All right. The closest was the last time we went to IMF under President Mahama.
Okay, so people react to the economic crisis.
Exactly. So you were talking about a trust deficit, which you have to try to, close, because in a crisis, you are asking the people to make adjustments to their lifestyle because you cannot really meet all their needs. So you have to bring the people with you. Mm. And in that respect, there are things that you have to do that suggest that you are with the people. And that's why in our own proposals and so on, we made some specific things which we think were symbolic that suggest to the people that I understand your pain, but not that I just understand your pain, but I am with you. Mm. So for starters, the fact that we finally got an address from the president on this specific issue, and now he was taking personal leadership like he had done during the COVID, that's a plus. I was even expecting that he would indicate that his ministers, and particularly certain ministries like agric, health, trade, would be also having separate, actions on and talking to the people about very specific things, and I'll come to that, like food inflation and so on. The twin things we are dealing with on the economic side is inflation and depreciation, right? And that's affecting very specific things. Food inflation is affecting transportation, it's affecting people's investment and savings, it's affecting businesses. So you can kind of break them into silos. All of these you have to respond to. Like they are the symptoms of a problem. We all know the problem is structural, but the symptoms have to be addressed. So we were very clear in our proposals that we want really short-term things. The only short-term thing I really heard was really about the FX and how to try to sort of manage the speculation and so on. Even in that respect, and most of it is going to be kind of law and order type of, trying to close all the black market and all of those things. But I was disappointed because as I listened, I was hoping that maybe there are some details that will make this very clear, that I can see, okay, what are we going to do about food inflation? What are some of the practical steps that government wants to take immediately to address, and as we did in our proposal, we said, okay, you can take 5 staples that everybody's eating, rice, everybody is eating yam or
sugar,
things, and say, okay, what is the problem? If at this point it's not to do with transportation or it's not to do with freighting or whatever, but it's to do with actually that it might be available in the rural areas, but it's not getting to the urban centers, and therefore the demand is creating a demand-supply problem. How can we intervene? I remember even before the crisis deepened, the agriculture minister talked about that they were facilitated through warehouses and they were going to get food, into. I'm like, what happened to that? Because if people beginning to see that, okay, Kenke costs this much, but because government has stepped into the market to facilitate certain things, Kenke has now reduced to 2 cedis.
That is if you're dealing with maize supply.
Or maize, exactly. Yeah. That makes a big difference because people then begin to see that, okay, we are making, steps, we're taking steps. We proposed the work from home, that yes, there are people that can work from home and save themselves from taking transportation every day.
Because of the 4 channels.
Yeah. Use the bully pulpit as a president to basically just encourage people, like we did in the pandemic. Take that, you can even talk to the telcos and say, can we have some subsidy on data so that people can have data and work from home? So for me, the specific things around just dealing with the symptoms are very, very, very important, because then people begin to feel that, okay, yeah, there are going to be difficult times, we would adjust, but government is directly dealing with these things that will help us. On the governance side, when I heard it also, we heard about the cuts, 30% cuts to basic salary for...
Which, by the way, is old.
Then 30% on discretionary spending. Now, the cuts to basic salary, as we even showed in our press conference, what comes with being a minister is even more. Just the fuel for fueling V8s and a monthly, if you begin to put the cost on that, we need to get some of these. They might be symbolic. They might not be the ones that will reduce your external debt or whatever, but it's symbolic. Let not people see the profligacy and all of those things. People have to live within their means. So what can you do by saying, okay, we are not importing any V8s. There's a freeze. Remember, even at some point, the president issued a circular.
Yeah, it was part of it.
Yes. But, now we can monitor it. Nobody should be,
We've had the 2022 models.
Because they are gas.
A lot of the 2022 models already in town.
So they are guzzling, so we can do ministers. We can reduce ministers. I do not understand why we need 3 deputy ministers in some places, 2 deputy ministers in them. We can reduce that. These are very important morale boosting actions. I don't understand why government is resistant on addressing this. Because when you don't do that, then you are going to get stuck in this credibility hole. After the president's speech, anybody who's followed, there's all kind of mimes and, so if government does not appreciate, understand that there is this gap, and this gap has to be closed. If the people are going to come with you, then I don't understand what they are looking at. So it just sounds too perfunctory. I understand the long-term agenda, looking at the targets, but even that I ask myself, you say discretionary spending. There are arrears in statutory funds that have not been paid, right? District Assembly Common Fund and so on and so forth. I think some of them are 2 quarters behind and all of that. So when you cut something that you have not released, what exactly does it mean?
So for me, the specifics were in the. So do you agree? This point as well?
I think I can agree with Kojo. But let me say that in times of crisis, leadership is everything. Leadership will calm the nerves of the ordinary person to obviously have an idea that even though we are in crisis, there's somebody in charge and we'll get out of it. Unfortunately, the president waited too long to address the nation, one, and even when he decided to address the nation, his posture alone wasn't good enough. Watching the president, I saw someone who's angry. That's how I see it.
Angry at who? Himself?
That's the question. But I did not see someone who is ready to solve a problem. The body language is everything. So I was more interested in his body language. But I saw an angry man.
But he was going to war. This is a crisis time. You roll up your sleeves and you show that you're ready.
Your people are in crisis. Their livelihood is at stake. People are struggling to have 3 square meals a day. They're looking up to you as the president. You don't come threatening them because some of them are rumor mongering. You come, obviously, by talking to them in a way that they can buy your message. I think whoever wrote that speech, if it's himself, he did a very poor job. If it's another person, whoever did that job must go. Because actually, the people of Ghana were waiting for that masterstroke, but they did not come out as such. Let me tell you something. Evans, if the president had come and had announced to the people of Ghana to say, yes, because of the crisis A, B, C, and D, I'm relieving 40 of my ministers or 30 of my ministers. Yeah. It's a big signal. It tells the people of Ghana that this man means business. It calms the nerves of everyone. Quantify it and say that I'm making savings of A, B, C, D. And I'm going to put these savings to say LEAP, to support the elderly.
And LEAP will go directly to the most vulnerable.
Exactly. You see, the people of Ghana want to see things like this. The only thing I took away from his speech is that for the first time, listening to the president, I heard someone admitted to a crisis. I've never heard the president say that we are in deeper difficulty, we are in crisis. And he said it with authority. That for me is the first time. But you see, Ghana's crisis started in 2021. The train left the train station far in 2021. We are 1 year, 10 months into a crisis. It has taken him too long to realize that we are in crisis.
Or to admit. Maybe he realized it, but now he's admitting publicly.
In fact, his posturing does not tell me that he knew there was a crisis. He just got to realize it not very long ago, maybe 3, 4 months, 6 months ago. Because you see, if he was made aware earlier, I'm sure this situation could have been remedied.
But he knew this. In March, the finance minister addressed a major press conference following the president actually saying to us that the finance minister will do so and announced these 30%
March is how long ago?
This is a long time ago.
March of this year, about 6 months ago.
Yeah, at that time, they knew that it was a crisis, so they're trying to do something about it.
But you see, Evans, yes, granted that probably he's been aware, but government lifestyle does not show a government, that's not, for me, sitting somewhere, does not tell me that this government is aware that there's a crisis. If a president, for instance, is going on a political tour in the middle of crisis, you don't go with 40 Land Cruisers following you. All these things send wrong signals out.
So the Land Cruisers maybe could be his ministers.
No, but you see, you don't do that. Put them in a bus. These are things that people watch and it irritates people. Okay. You don't want that because it's state money that you are actually wasting. Let me tell you, as we speak, a number of ministries and agencies are not actively working because the money that they will require to do the work is not forthcoming, obviously because of the fiscal crunch that we are seeing. Why don't you take opportunity to merge some of the agencies and ministries? You can't easily do that because as we speak, you pay them and they do nothing. They don't even get money to buy basic stationery to work. So just merge them. Merge them. Nothing stops you from merging them.
I want to
sack some of them.
I want us to go to some of the specifics, and then once I start that, and I'll get Bright in, who's joined us now. What are the key specifics? And I know your field is finance, so I'll come to the finance bit later, very detailed, and bring Kojo in. But fuel, when it comes to the ordinary man's pain, is the main one.
Yeah. That is the reason why we are where we are.
Yes, and the president said something yesterday, which was really groundbreaking if they succeed. That government is working to secure reliable and regular sources of affordable petroleum products for the Ghanaian market. Your comment on that?
Evans, first, if you look at the inflation carefully, the inflation we are going through carefully, fuel is a major determinant of the inflation that we are seeing. Yeah. Obviously, because of one major variable, that is the exchange rate.
True.
I'm not aware what the president is going to do to bring fuel regular and affordable.
We say get regular sources of affordable sources. So we are going to explore affordable petroleum sources.
So I want to know where it's coming from. If it's crude, I would say yes, it's country to country. Maybe G to G. Government will be able to, build on its relationship and get crude. We've done some in the past under President Mills. Yeah. We've got Angola, we've got Nigeria, President Kufuor. We had it. So if it's crude, I will have no problem. But even if we get crude, you have to refine it. Yeah. So we are not getting crude. Yeah. You can get crude on credit and probably refine and sell cheaper. Yeah. Because you can talk to countries, Venezuela, those countries that you are close with, that probably are sympathetic to your situation, you can get crude. But for petroleum product, but he did not say crude oil. He said petroleum products.
Yes.
I doubt. I don't know what is in his sleeves, but I doubt because it's not crude. And I don't know. Because most of the refineries in the world are commercially owned. Even those ones that are state-owned refineries, you have to give them LCs before you can get crude. If you go to Rotterdam, even Russia, I don't know whether he's going to go to Russia to get Putin to give him some crude.
I think we burned that bridge.
But after going to UN General Assembly and supporting Ukraine, that train has moved. You cannot go to Putin and get a petroleum product again. So I don't know what is in his sleeves. Maybe the information minister will be the one.
Yeah,
that's why I would have wished the information minister is with us so that we can have a proper conversation and not after we've left. Then.
Okay, let me get Kojo's take on that. Yeah. Because really, if you fix that, that almost sort of eases a lot of the challenge we are all facing.
Well, I don't know what price range eventually would, depending on if you work out all of that. What is affordable? I don't know. Because from the time that this crisis deepened, we've doubled, the price for fuel products.
More than from 6 to 20 times.
Then we're talking about 17.
17 tomorrow morning.
Exactly. So I don't know even how much reduction you get and what implication it will have on people's, But I've wondered about Tor. Apparently Tor, if it's full capacity, can refine about 45% of what we are importing, right? So
and John Mahama made a recommendation that we should empower Tor now to start.
Yeah, what is the strategy? Because certainly whatever we are doing, yes, short term is 1-2 years. Is there something that can be done with Tor? Because I'm asking myself, okay, we also have crude here. Certainly you want to sell it for the FX. But the point is that if you go and import,
your own crude.
Exactly. If you go and import, you will need FX. So what cost-benefit analysis are we looking at and saying, okay, why don't we see if we can even get some of our oil as
our own
barrels?
Oil produce,
yes, barrels from our partners.
Give it to Tor.
Tor to refine. If we have to, refit or whatever, look at some of those things. Because I think that has to be in the conversation, even in the short term. So that we can, because at this time, you have to really throw away some of the textbook, and just think about what practical things. And that's where I really hope that the president and the government can listen. there are people who have ideas.
You feel they're not listening?
I just feel, this is why, I mean, some of us, we have gone through this, sometimes you feel like you are just, people are tone deaf and they are not, hearing what, there are so many people who are willing to help. Because what, if the president succeeds, if the government succeeds, our burden will be reduced. So why should anybody want to sort of see government fail? It means our own failure and more suffering for us. So I don't think that this is an environment where somebody needs to win and somebody needs to lose. If the person win, we all win. If they lose, we all lose. So I feel that let's get more conversation around these things and put some, I'm more interested in the practical. Because I think the only way people begin to believe you, that you're credible, is when they begin to see some action that actually leads to some
you want to see tangibles.
Yes, and it might not be significant, but at least they begin to see that it is moving in the right direction. Then they even give you more trust. So some of these proposals, as I said, I was like, the COVID time, as soon as the president gives a speech, then you get these very detailed, ideas. And I was expecting that after the retreat, I think 3-day retreat or something like that, some of those specific things
would have happened.
Would have happened. So maybe when Kojo comes,
after the retreat, only 28 minutes presidential speech came out of it. So,
I mean,
and it came out very, in quote, empty.
Yeah, I'll come to you, Atul, with more, but let me bring in Bright Simmons now. Bright, what's your verdict?
Hi, Evans. Good evening. I hope you can see me on the screen now.
Yes, my producers will put it up shortly on the screen for us to see. Yes, but you could proceed.
I have some slides to share, but I don't have the rights. So I don't know if they're going to permit me to do that in the instant.
Okay. Yes, my producer says you can go ahead.
Unfortunately, it's not giving me the rights. So I guess there are three primary issues that have come up in respect of this speech by the president that has been very long awaited, and given the context. And I wanted to, try and address a couple of them as far as those of us that are in the think tank community are concerned, how we perceive this speech to improve upon current sentiment in the market. Let me see if I can now, okay, good. So I can now share the screen. So give me a second. It makes it easier for me to organize my thoughts. I apologize. So I've broken it down into three primary issues. The first one is we have a challenge, as your very distinguished panelists in the studio, Dr. Forson and Dr. Kojo Asante have already pointed out, with trust and credibility. So one of the things I did not expect to see, even though it was a minor issue, was the fact that the president's speech had some serious factual inaccuracies. This was his biggest speech on the subject matter, so you will assume that his research assistants and his aides will have spent a significant amount of time making sure that he's presenting something of unimpeachable integrity. So I was surprised to learn, or rather to find out, that he was suggesting that, Senegal has seen inflation go up 11 times. Togo has seen inflation go up 16 times. And that's just not a fact, because you can just go and look either from their own statistical authorities, the data that they put out, or from the IMF, which performs a global surveillance function. And you realize that none of that is true. The actual numbers, as I've displayed on the screen, show that, yes, Senegal has seen some inflation movement, but that inflation movement is nowhere near 11 times. It's around 4 times. And I'll make another point, which is also important. Secondly, it is done that with very significant growth in its economy. Whereas Ghana is tanking to 3.6%, Senegal is increasing about 5%. We also saw that with the case of Togo, where it said it's increased to about 16 times. And that is not true either. I just have a certain feeling that if it's a president speaking, to show that the work that has gone into this speech, and of course the speech is reflective of the policy direction that the country is being taken towards. And therefore, you expect that, that speech is informed by really robust analysis. You understand my point?
Yes.
If
especially when the speech is as a result of a 3-day retreat where all the ministers and cabinet ministers were there.
Before that, many months of planning. So you expect that, the president's speech will be completely unimpeachable. So I was surprised by that. So even though it's a minor point, it raises issues about the quality of the work overall that is guiding the policy development. But that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is it also reflects a lack of ownership about in the government about the current situation. And what I mean by that is simple. If the government continues to insist that none of its policies are responsible for where we are, it's going to be increasingly more difficult for us to take the very hard decisions that have to be taken at the heart of government to try and improve the situation. Because if everything is, others have it worse than us, our situation is better than others, and none of our problems are particularly of our own making, then we cannot really set out to reform the things we must reform. But when you look at the situation, the continuous blaming of this Ukraine-Russia war and other external factors, nobody disputes that those factors have contributed. The challenge is whether they are the primary reason why Ghana's situation is the way they are. So if you look at the chart that I put on the screen, you realize that Senegal, Togo are actually countries that have greater exposure to Russia and Ukraine directly. So if you separate this into two, you say, okay, due to the war, let's say because of that, there's some supply chain related matters and there's global inflation increases. And therefore there's a uniform global inflation increase. Then you'll expect it to affect most countries uniformly. Then you say, are there countries that are particularly exposed and they will be affected a bit more? And you find out that on those countries, in relation to those countries in Africa, Ghana is not one, right? And you will look very closely at the trade data, the investment data, all the channels of exposure, and you will discover that Ghana is not one of those countries that are particularly exposed. So we are only exposed to the extent that globally inflation has risen. So if inflation has risen globally from about 5-something% to 10% globally, you cannot explain your particular challenges, especially when your inflation rate is now number 2 or so in the whole of Africa. It's very difficult for you to continue to make this argument. And the more the government continues to push this argument, and the more analysts push back, the more the government suffers a credibility deficit. So we look at Senegal, much greater exposure to both Ukraine and Russia compared to Ghana, and they haven't seen inflation skyrocket to the level that ours have. The other point is also we have a significant challenge with the selectivity in the selection of the countries that were used. Why didn't the government, for instance, or the president use Nigeria, where inflation has moved from 11.9 to 17.4? These are countries that are much closer to us. They are peer countries. So you can make the argument that, whatever is happening in Nigeria is much more resonant with what's happening in Ghana than what's happening in the safer area, given the fact that historically our inflation does not correlate with theirs at all, but correlates more with peer countries like Kenya, Nigeria, and the rest, who do not have a peg to an external currency, as is the case in the safer area. So you look at Kenya, you look at Uganda, you look at Zambia, you look at Nigeria, you can look at so many countries, and you will find out that the increase in inflation are nowhere near as bad as ours. And in some countries, actually, they've seen an improvement, like Zambia, which has seen an improvement of inflation from 22% in 2021 down to about 9.9%. So you go and select safer area countries who have very low inflation, forgetting that in those countries, because they're already in the single-digit band, even if inflation increased by 7 times and it's still within the single-digit band, it's still within the inflation targeting mechanism of the central bank. So in Ghana, for instance, we say it's 8% minus or plus 2%, right? So if, for instance, Ghana was at 3% and it increased to 9%, that's a threefold increase, but it's still within the targeting regime. So you don't make these comparisons without, providing context where, in particular, your goal is to try and establish that Ghana's situation is either not as bad as the other countries, or that, these problems are global and therefore they are imported into Ghana. Secondly, in Ghana, we do have the information, we do have the data, the empirical evidence from scholars who have studied this matter, done all the co-integration analysis, done all the unit root analysis, and established that there is a direct relationship between the growth of money in the economy or the circulation of money in the economy, an increase in the circulation and inflation. We have that very established fact. So we have it all the way back from 1965. Those that have done time series all the way from 1965, and they've established strongly, after accounting for all the non-stationarity and all the other factors and performed all the co-integration tests, that this dependence is not spurious. It's a very real dependence. When we increase money supply in the economy, we increase inflation. And we do know that money supply have increased, as I will talk about in a moment. We know that the increase at the end of 2021, net issuance of domestic debt was about 181 billion Ghana cedis. We know today they are talking about something in the region of about 200 billion cedis or even less. So net increase in domestic borrowing has not surged as dramatically as the deficit. What that means simply is that the amount of borrowing on net base, a lot of them borrowing, we are borrowing to retire debt. We are borrowing to pay the debt, the domestic debt. So there is still a huge amount of our deficit that is not covered by domestic borrowing. And we have been shut out from international markets, capital markets. So where is the rest of the money coming from? And we know that the government is spending maybe almost 50 billion more than it's raising, nearly 50 billion more than it's raising.
Are you suggesting that this is a result of printing?
Or the central bank buying bonds, right?
Okay.
There are different ways in which the central bank can give money to the government. It can go and buy its debt on the open market. It can do some of these sweetheart deals that it's been doing on the repo market and a whole bunch of other things. But whatever be the case, there is monetization, as it's called, which is essentially money is being created out of thin air to allow the government to fund the deficit.
I see.
Secondly, it's also been the case historically, that every time we've had a major inflation spike in Ghana, and this goes all the way back to 1985, there's been some global dynamic as well. So if I show you some of the key areas, 1994, we saw one of the major spikes of inflation going to globally. This is global inflation, going to about 10%. And you remember in 1994, that is when we started to have huge, massive cost of living crisis in Ghana that led to Kumipreko and things like that. I'm showing also the 28, 29 situation where you see another major spike in global inflation. So every time we've had, cost of living crisis in Ghana, there's a global contribution. The issue is about the degree to which our domestic circumstances are the primary driver. And those facts are very ample, because otherwise then the situation would be that during Kumipreko, when the current president was on the street, he was blaming the government unfairly. And I doubt that anybody in the government today will accept that fact. The other point, which I'll move on quickly to, given that I've already spent so much of my time on this matter, is the issue of the haircuts, which I'm very sure your very eminent guest in the studio will be exploring much further. But there are important things. Let's remember where we are. Under IMF policies, if your debt is not sustainable, you must show that you need to have you'll be able to deploy fiscal policies that will bring the debt into sustainability. But then there's another test. If those fiscal policies themselves are not sustainable, so first you establish debt sustainability. If you can't establish debt sustainability and you say, look, in the next couple of years, I'm going to implement fiscal measures that will bring debt sustainability, then they look at the sustainability of those fiscal measures. So if, for instance, you claim that going forward, we're going to raise taxes by 30% across board, and therefore revenue will double, they will look at all the political economic factors of whether or not you can do that in practice. And in most cases, you can't, right? So if you look at the IMF framework for determining what to do when they want to give you a program, and after they've done debt sustainability analysis and it's concluded that your debt is not sustainable, there's been an evolution. In the past, in the old framework, automatically you go to debt restructuring. Now, in the 2016 framework that is currently applicable, you have the option to also go and try and raise concessional finance, which is why the finance minister I talk about talking to the Germans and talking to the French and all of that. The truth of the matter, though, is we know bilateral financing is much more complicated and cumbersome nowadays, given that they themselves are having a lot of fiscal pressures in their own countries, and generally it takes longer. So it's not a short-term solution, which means some debt restructuring is inevitable. Now, the president then comes out and says that, well, in a way, he almost acknowledges it because he does not completely dismiss the idea of debt restructuring. He just argues that there will not touch treasury bills and other instruments, which is a bit vague. Which other instruments are those? He leaves it open. Okay, but at least he takes out treasury bills. Then secondly, he says, we want to bring our debt to GDP to 55% and debt service to revenue 18%. Let's remember that currently debt to GDP is in the region of about 110% or 105% or 100%, depending on what you add. Because the government chooses not to add certain liabilities because it argues that they shouldn't be added to its stock. So whether it's cocoa bills or it's energy sector arrest, etc. And then debt servicing is close to 55% as I speak. It's getting closer to 60%. Now, in those circumstances, we have to ask ourselves, what is it over the next 6 years government can do to bring that to fruition? Remember that the IMF is not going to give you more than $1 billion a year. And I will explain why $1 billion a year is not by itself enough resources to do much. So the IMF program is to signal to other actors that fiscal consolidation and other actions are in place, which may reopen your access to international markets so they can borrow from other people and mobilize more financing. In the event that you can't, your domestic program should be sufficient. Now, the issue is, then he goes on further to say that in order to be able to achieve these things, to bring our debt to 55% and how much we spend paying the debt to 18% of all the revenues we collect, in order to achieve these things, he's not going to touch treasury bills and there will be no haircuts. If you say there are no haircuts, there are three main ways you can do debt restructuring. You can ask people that the amount of money I owe you, I can't pay all of it, so take some out. So I owe you 100 million, I'll pay 70 million. Or you can say that, well, I'm paying you interest of 20 million every month, 20 million every year on this 100 million. I cannot pay that. I can pay 10 million every year. Those two instances are both haircuts. So either both of them are out, or as the Finance Information Minister has tried belatedly to explain, he refers to only the first scenario, in which case, if it's 100 million, we will not reduce it to 70 million. But we are allowed to say that rather than pay you 20 million every year, we will now pay you 50 million. That is ambiguous, not clear. The second issue is, okay, if the president ties the hands of his negotiators behind their back and say that of the three usual methods, which many countries that have done debt restructuring around the world have used, normally they exchange your notes one to one or some other formula. They take your old debt and give you new debt with new terms, usually sometimes bringing down the face value. If the government says, for us, we won't do that, then you are left with only one choice, substantial. Let's assume that the information minister is right and the president did not intend to touch interest, or rather to ring-fence interest from the debt treatment that is possible, or that's likely now. Let's say that is also correct. So the president now takes one of the options off the table and leaves his negotiators at the table with two. They can only extend the maturity, which means that if the debt was due to be paid in 2 years, we will tell you that no, rather we'll pay you in 5 years. Or we would combine that with some reduction of the interest that we pay you every year. And thirdly, of course, we will not touch treasury bills. The inferential analysis or the consequential analysis is one. If you do only the maturity extension, which simply means that if you say we can't pay you in 2 years, we'll pay you in 5 years, does that itself free up enough of the burden that is on you?
And what's your verdict? I need to come back to the studio on this. What's your verdict on that?
Should I wrap up? Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Then the issue around, the most important thing, of course, is that all of this predates COVID and Ukraine, right? We have a clear situation on our hands where the government, when it was going to borrow its last Eurobond, actually not its last Eurobond, the Eurobond before, in 2020, before COVID. So this was February 2020 when it issued that prospectus. It says very clearly that in 2017, the government expects, in 2019, the government expects that debt servicing could exceed 60%. This tells you that way before COVID and Ukraine, the government was already in a situation where it had significant concern about its ability to pay debt. What about COVID or about Ukraine have changed that factor? Lastly, and maybe I have the opportunity to explain further, if the government decides that it's going to try and use fiscal measures to try and achieve this, then we have to look historically whether the government has ever been able to generate the kind of fiscal surpluses that you have to generate. Simply means that going forward, we will not have the situation where our revenue our expenditure exceed our revenue. Our revenue for a number of years will have to exceed our expenditure. And we can look through our history.
And we've never had that before. I mean, that has...
Very rare.
That's, yeah.
Very rare all the way from 2000. And very, very, so you are talking of huge and massive things that must happen. Another point you have to bear in mind is the rate at which the domestic debt is growing because we have no access to international markets. Even before, when we had access to international markets, we're growing domestic debt nearly at 30%. We're also borrowing about $6 billion a year on average in those last 3 years. So you have two crazy confluence of factors. One being you can't borrow in dollars internationally anymore, or rather you can borrow only a very small amount, cocoa money and a few other cents. So let's say your ability to borrow has dropped from about $6 billion to about $2 billion. That creates a gap of about $4 billion. If you try and use domestic resources to plug that gap, your debt accumulation, how much domestic debt is accumulating, will also accelerate in tandem.
So bottom line, this president's assertion that there will be no haircut, you don't see that something that is realistic looking at analysis. And actually, you also have the same conclusion.
Yes. Evans, I disagree with the president in his categorical statement that there will be no haircut. Probably he misspoke. If he did not, then probably somebody actually has misled the president.
Why did you say that?
I say this for a simple reason that in the statement from the president, he said that they are going to make debt sustainable by 2028 by bringing debt to 55% of GDP in present value terms. Currently, we are about 105% of GDP. So you can work backwards, and it's very easy to do. Now that we know when they want to make the debt sustainable. So he's giving us the date, so you can work backwards. By just putting it in the model, the debt numbers put in the model, you cannot achieve that without a haircut. Number two, he said external debt servicing, they are going to move it to 18% of domestic, of revenue. Currently, external debt servicing is 35% of revenue. If you want to move it backwards, change the dynamics, you either introduce a lot more taxes, which obviously we do not have that room to do, and so you cannot do it without a haircut. I am projecting that government of Ghana cannot do without haircut.
So why would the president say that? There's agreement I've heard.
So
Professor Bokbeng, Bryce Simon, yourself, we've been there before, all agree that.
So I'm telling you that
say that
there was going to be an external haircut on external debt, both principal and that of coupons, interest. Domestic, there will be some form of haircut. My model tells me that there will be some form of haircut on the interest payment on domestic. And there's a possibility that they can do some minimal haircut on domestic bonds. I'm surprised that the president will come out and make that category.
But that's just to calm the markets. On the back of that Bloomberg report where everybody started going to try and dump their bonds, etc.
But that is where I can agree with Bright and Kodo here. The president is having a credibility crisis. The same government had come out to tell us that they will not go to IMF. The president said, obviously the Minister of Finance and his deputies are on tapes, have said that they will not do an IMF program. Few months down the line, the government have to do U-turn. Once again today, in his address to the nation, he assured the people of Ghana, and he said, individuals and institutional investors
will not
get a haircut. As a result, our bonds started rallying. Rallying, yes. CD
but that's supposed to have the opposite effect.
CD appreciated because investors were rejoicing. If tomorrow the reality dawns on you and they get to realize that the president, in quotes, lied, or the situation has reversed.
That is if the president changes your mind.
And then he changes his mind. Probably that will mean that there's no credibility left. You don't run a country like that. Then they will punish you in a very bad manner. To the extent that the same way that the city depreciated when you announced that there will be no haircut, when you change your mind, the city will depreciate.
You're almost suggesting that
in a bad way.
You're almost suggesting that there's down the line we'll come back to a restructuring and a haircut.
You see, Evans, I can also put my credibility on the line. I do not see this government going through an IMF program where restructuring is inevitable because you need to restructure your debt before you get a program, without some form of haircut. Because obviously, if government decide not to do this kind of haircut, then it means that they are going to, abandon the IMF program. I do not think that the government has an option. They will have to see the IMF program through. And ensuring that we get an IMF program, you have to do debt restructuring. The numbers that I have seen, obviously, if you work backwards, you remember, today we have the domestic external debt of about $28 billion.
Yes.
This $28 billion, 57% of it is owned to private individuals. 25%, private banks or individuals. 25% is owned to multilateral institutions. These multilateral institutions, you can't restructure that debt because they are senior debt. So it's out. Then you have bilateral loans.
Yeah.
That is also not restructurable. You have to go through common framework. So if you are talking of restructuring, you are talking of 57% of the 28 billion. And you want to achieve debt sustainability by 2028. You cannot do without restructuring. Then come to the domestic debt. Look at the interest that we are paying. Very big interest that we are paying, largely on the back of the domestic debt. Okay, so how can you achieve that without some sort of haircut from the domestic side, as long as interest is concerned, and the possibility of cutting the haircut, the principal? So as for the haircut, whether they can dodge it today or tomorrow, there will be some form of haircut. And if you don't have hair like I don't have, they may end up shaving your
Could you
your mustache.
Your final thoughts on this?
So again, I come back to the governance issue around this. You're talking about a period, even in terms of the targets, a period that transition another government. Because granted, the president in 2 years will not be president. It will be another government, whether it's MPP or it's NDC. So in terms of beginning to think about the medium term, this is a conversation that has to be broader. Because some of the targets you are setting, 55%, all those kinds of things, whoever is going to
Somebody else
will have to implement it. And we have to kind of be realistic. So I know the finance minister put together a committee that was supposed to be having talks with the banks. What is the outcome of that? Is that what has informed the president to make this categorical statement? Right?
You know that for sure.
But that input is important for being realistic and dealing with the matter. So I don't know on what basis the president makes that categorical statement. But giving because we are not the only ones who have numbers. It's not only the state that whoever, the investors, they paid huge amounts of money to actually work out, the true state. So it's not just believing you. If they think it's fantasy, people will still take action regardless. So I believe that this is the kind of conversation, yes, it's just coming out of the retreat, but this is the kind of conversation, even if it was meant to calm the markets, it's a very, very categorical statement. Given all the set of facts, it sounds like it's too good to be true.
And when it sounds too good,
certainly tenure elongation, it will happen because you have to stretch it. But even that, what is the plan for actually raising enough revenue to be able to, to pay up? And there will definitely be some interest, negotiations that you have.
So you're also not buying it?
I'm not buying it. And that's what I'm saying, that I wanted to hear what the committee, because it was particularly for this.
Let me ask you finally, when you did the press conference, you were clear that these demands you want, now you heard from the president, of course, he didn't attach it.
Yeah.
So what next? What do you do?
Well, for us, as I said, for me and even all of us talking, we are in this together. So when we talk about this with passion, it's not because it's about, we are talking about our lives as well. So we want information that is clear, is truthful, is realistic, is not pandering, to the public in any way. And at this point, we don't want, now that we started this journey where the president is taking full ownership and leadership of this, we don't want to be going a step backwards and going forward. Let's have more conversations and clarity among ourselves before the president comes and announces something. Okay. Because it's a very, very fragile environment. And one thing other that, profiteering that he talked about, I was not satisfied that it was just a question of appeal. right?
They can't do kalabule. They can't impose
Yeah,
price controls.
but I think that we have to have some very detailed, because there are some markets where that this is just people just taking advantage of the situation.
So the state has to step in and deal with it.
Yes, because I think the state has a responsibility.
I need to wrap up and go to my next segment. You have 30 seconds.
If I happen to be the president of the republic, in times like this, I will own up the crisis.
He done that yesterday.
In fact, no, it's not good enough. I would have. In fact, the budget is coming. I urge the president to present his own budget to parliament and own up the budget, show leadership, announcing major cut in expenditure, and introduce good compliance measures for revenue. That is what I urge the president. Anything less than that, the budget will not send the needed confidence that the public need, and that will not be good for us as a country.
Thank you, Kojo Asante. Thank you, Bright, and thank you, Ato Forsing. I'm going to take a quick break. When I return, Kojo Ponkroma, my guest next. And thank you for staying with us. So you've heard the analyst's view the whole day. You've heard the view of the various groups, GPL, TU, TUC. Everybody has said a few things about the president's pronouncements last night. On the back of that last 1 hour, from the analysis from Bright Simmons, Kojo Asante, and Dr. Ato Forsing, in the studio with me is the Information Minister, Kojo Ponkroma. Kojo, thank you very much for your time here on PM Express once again.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start from the general.
Yeah.
The whole day, I'm pretty sure you have a monitoring team. They've monitored the airwaves. I'm sure you yourself have been doing the rounds across the country. I get the general sense I get, listening to specifically Guta, GAU, GPRTU, a few experts, Hoteliers Association, I mean, very specific. The one word has, in fact, Kojo Asante, who civil society, who was here, one word that had come up is disappointed. Did not meet our expectation. That's a verdict. What's your reaction to it?
Well, yes, indeed, there are some people who are disappointed, some people for whom the president's address did not meet their expectation. And there are some persons who were also very pleased that he touched on all the key issues that they were expecting him to touch on. Some were pleased with the fact that he had started articulating the broad measures that we should be embarking on as a republic. The reaction has been mixed, but this is really not surprising. I remember right from the beginning when we were fighting the last crisis, COVID. And for example, when we talk of pool testing and the fact that we had tested X numbers in a day, you had people, including some of the people who you have mentioned specifically by name, saying it's not true, it's not possible, you can't test this number, I don't believe it, it's not credible. We had all of those ones. But I think what was important was that as we kept going, and as we kept explaining and showcasing the realities, people started coming along with us. And as you, our colleagues in the media, gave us an opportunity to reach out more and show to the various stakeholders why what we were saying was true. For example, people started understanding that the numbers we were putting out were not cooked up. People started understanding that the testing that we're talking about was not cooked up, and that the interventions that were being rolled out were interventions that were clearly thought through. So for me, at the beginning of quote-unquote a crisis, it is really not strange when people say, oh, I'm disappointed, I'm not pleased, I don't find this credible, I don't believe this, etc. It's normal at the beginning of a crisis. The important thing is the consistency with which you go, the honesty and the clarity that you bring to the table, your ability to even concede where there are errors, and to carry everybody along. Because at the end of the day, our objective, our common objective, is to resolve together the challenges that the Ghanaian economy is having. And so views have been mixed, but I think it's early days.
So let's go to some of the specifics. I mean, there's a lot for you to go through. I'm sure the whole day you've had a lot, and from our own 1 hour conversation. Another sense, reading from the president's document, another text of what he said, coming into expectation for many was that we're going to hear some real groundbreaking new interventions that will deal with our current crisis now. The view was we need to survive today to fix the long-term issues.
That's true.
But some of what the president said included, many said, very old promises, such as his announcement of an implementation of a property rate regime. Did you concede that this was a largely rehash of old promises, some of which have failed?
So let me give you the context. First, there was this suggestion that the president was not communicating with the country, which is not true, because the president had been traveling across the country and speaking to some of the interventions at various places, sometimes in radio stations, sometimes at debates, sometimes at programs. But we can see that the fact that he was not on, quote unquote, the fellow Ghanaians platform, articulating them, meant that there was a good number of people across the country who were not even following some of those interventions. The second point is that some of those interventions don't change. You can bake it, twist it, turn it, they don't change. They are the very things that you need to do, and the important thing is how you get it done and done well to deliver the results. Now, yesterday, and things like property rates that you talk about, for me, amount to one minute detail. But yesterday, the president outlined 12 measures, some of which dealt with the forex situation, some of which dealt with one of the most important things, which is biting our people, cost of living, some of which dealt with things like, trying to mitigate the impact of what is going on the most vulnerable in society. I think the best approach is to ask yourself, issue by issue, does this solution work?
Which
if
really
it does,
is the heart of this conversation.
yes. If it does, then we go to the next step of who is responsible, what are the timelines,
And the specifics.
And the specifics.
In fact, I'll come to that. I'm going to go through each and allow you some of the big ones and allow you to explain. But just before you came in, Kojo Asante, civil society. So one of the key things we're looking for is, the substance is good. We'll go to the substance. But in the crisis, you want your leader to exude credibility, that you can trust his word.
Yeah.
And that is so important, because if you miss that, I'm not listening to your specifics, because I just simply can't trust what is coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
It's a reason why I'm just going to put one specific issue that he said to you. It's not a major intervention, but it's one that people will look at and say, but how do I trust that if you're even getting that wrong, or you haven't even fulfilled that promise, and yet you included it in the major, crisis speech, then maybe there's a credibility issue there. Property rate. If you look at your 2022 budget, you've said in there that you implement this January 2022, right? We are in November. In fact, tomorrow is November. We are in end of October. The president is still talking about it, and the implementation hasn't started. When the timeline fixed for this was effective January 2022. Look at that and you ask yourself a fair question. Why is the president mentioning this 10 odd months after the deadline that he himself, his finance minister, had put to it, had elapsed?
So property rate is really not one of the 12 major things the president.
I know, I'm just saying that one of the items shows credibility. That's why I prefaced my question to the credibility question.
I'll come to it specifically.
Because that is an issue.
I'll come to it specifically, but I just want to situate it well. That the 12 big things the president talked about does not exactly include property rates. I admit property rates and other revenue options were mentioned under the conversation of moving our revenue to GDP from 13% to somewhere 18-20%. And the question becomes, so what has accounted for the inability to fully roll out what was initially envisaged in the last budget for property rates specifically? If you look at what has been done on property rates, there was the need to sign, because first of all, by the legal regime, property rates were done by the district assembly. We have now sought to employ a new method where they are done at the national level through, I think, local government ministry and then the Ghana Revenue Authority. And the contracting process and the legal maneuvering has taken some time. My understanding is that they've come very far and are due to kick off ASAP. It is a reason for which the president has confidence to mention it as part of the sub-measures that are aimed at delivering this moving revenue to GDP ratio from 13 to about 8.
But you consider this is a government that is suffering credibility issues on that, because in the budget, just a second, in the budget you said, in the budget paragraph 247, just a key, it's important. In the budget paragraph 247, the finance minister was clear. Government is proposing for consideration approval of this House fiscal policy measures, and the whole draft of it, Point two, implementation of a unified common platform for property rate administration with effect from 1st of January. My question is, in the midst of a crisis, when you include a policy that you have failed to meet your own deadline, to meet your own deadline.
It hasn't met the timeline. I'm saying to you
that throws
the president has confidence
question.
to mention it because of how far they have come with it. I can understand if somebody says, "Oh, you mentioned the last time it's not been delivered." Do you have reason to believe that it can happen this time? And I'm saying that the president is confident to mention it because of all the work they have done so far in getting the legal maneuvering done and in getting the platform deployed in the relevant areas. But in addition to that, for example, is something like the EVAT system, where you are no longer allowing organizations to do manual tabulation of VAT wherever they are. And you notice, for example, that when they did the VAT invigilation in some of the shops, VAT compliance has moved up by about 1,700%. It gives them basis to believe that if it is fully implemented, they can hit some of these numbers. Admittedly, as a republic, we have not met all our revenue targets in the decades gone by. NPP, NDC, it's been something that we have suffered over the years. But the president has confidence to mention these ones because of the kind of work that has been done on them. But back to the point, is the 12 big measures the president
Let's start with the first one. And I believe
mentioned
the most important one.
Whether they work or not.
The most important one is the fuel one. And I say the most important for obvious reasons. It's the one thing that affects almost everything else. And he says, quote, government is working to secure reliable and regular sources of affordable petroleum products for the Ghanaian market. How and where is government securing this affordable petroleum?
Okay.
How and where?
So I'll come to that specifically. Let me also mention that, as I've said all day today, these are highlight measures that have been measured. And like we've done in times past, the persons or the agencies responsible for them will have the opportunity to provide the details as we go along. Intermittently, as new measures are arrived at, the president will do the high-level announcement, and then those responsible will give the details. Remember when we did it during COVID? Sometimes after the big address, you have ministers responsible for various sectors or the Ghana Health Service come and flesh out the details. It's the same thing we are going to do here. And so the energy minister, the MPA, and the teams that are working on it are going to provide those details. But let me just tell you what I know about that. That today you are operating a deregulated market where BDCs go out there and buy from refineries and OTCs. We have had times in our republic where we have had similar challenges, causing the need or generating the need for the government to arrange direct supply channels, sometimes with sovereigns. In President Kufuor's day, we did it with Nigeria, with Sahara lifting for us. And you could have supply, credit lines, and a fixed price that you could bank on. It's a very similar arrangement that has already commenced, the exploration of which has already commenced. And I'm expecting that in the coming weeks, the MPA, the Energy Ministry, will have the opportunity to provide the details. But here's the question that I think we should start off by asking. What is causing the cost of living challenge that we face today? A good chunk of it is fuel. Fuel prices have gone up. We did a budget of $64 per barrel in 2021 November. By February this year, a barrel of crude oil had gone up to about 100. In fact, by February, March, had gone up to about 110, almost doubled. Today it's come down when I checked to, I think, about 94. But two things are happening. OPEC is cutting production, which signals that prices may go up. And if you are watching what's happening in Asia between China, Taiwan, you should be worried whether or not it may affect crude oil prices some more, should there be an escalation. Now, if indeed it is true that crude oil prices or fuel prices are the things that are causing an increase in transportation and food, and consequently a general escalation in prices of goods and services across our republic, then it should be true equally that if you tackle fuel, reliability and affordability, you will be finding a way to halt this rapid escalation. The first question is, does this work? For all your analysts and for all of the commentators, I would expect that this is the kind of contemplation we come to.
But that is where
it's a first step.
That is where the details you provide to back this then begin to address that fundamental question. When I asked how and where was to deal with that, you've said one of the ways you're going to do this. You cited the example when we did in the Kufuor, where we went to Nigeria, where they give us some, fuel crude at concessionary prices. Are we talking about crude? Are we talking about refined products?
So, assuming those details are not out, if you asked any of your analysts that what is the best way to deal with the cost of living, I would imagine that without even knowing all of these details, they will be able to tell you that the best way to go about it is to find a way to deal with the cost of fuel. The rapid
Yeah, I mean, that's
escalation.
everybody agrees with that.
So no,
I'm asking
I'm asking
the specifics now.
we're in an era where we don't necessarily have the common truth. Everybody
No,
has,
I mean, as for
everybody has
dealing with
their
the
own.
fuel prices,
So
I think there's
it is
consensus around the
important
table.
to examine the president's first measure. Does this work? If it does, we're waiting for Energy, NPA, the rest to provide the details.
No, but
and we can examine
as we
those
speak
details,
tonight,
yes.
without the specifics, nobody can say if this works.
No, I'm saying even if we hadn't put the specifics on the table, because I'm not sure all your analysts are just complaining. They are preferring solutions. Those solutions they are preferring, they are not preferring with these details in mind. They are preferring general solutions that if you want to deal with the cost of living, tackle fuel. And if you want to tackle fuel, this is the way.
And you
so
specifically
I'm saying
the way you want to do it. I mean, I think for a government, your is the solution.
Exactly.
And specifically how you're going to deliver. I'm saying that
exactly.
you've said
but the
specifically.
point, what the president has done is that he has delivered the high level, and I've told you that.
Yeah, that
you are
we
going to
should
have
expect.
the details being brought out. So
So-
the question I'm asking is, our examination is, does this work? I'm expecting
No, but
somebody to say,
as for does this work?
if I'm landing,
Okay.
if I'm landing, I'm expecting somebody to say, this is not the way to go. Or somebody to say, well, this works, now let's see the detail.
So
And then you have other high level measures.
but let's
that-
drill down. I mean, as I sit here right now, I
Yeah.
can't say what other people will say, but I can only ask for the specifics. Reliable, regular sources, affordable.
Yeah.
You've mentioned you've gone into the past about what we've done.
Yes.
And
We've
I'm
done it
asking.
before, yeah.
I'm asking. Are we going to seek the concessionary pricing in terms of securing this reliable, affordable on crude or on refined products? What
I'm
is
saying to you that I'm going to let the Energy Ministry and the MPA provide you all of those details.
Okay, so we don't. Do we know that as of
They
now?
have already started some work on it, even in the weeks gone by. Traveled out, met some of the other sovereigns and some of the other sources.
So we've already been out of the country engaging with
that has already started.
possible suppliers.
That has already started.
And we have assurances that we'll get it at affordable
I'm
prices.
saying that the work has already started. I will want them to come and put out those details. But what I'm saying to you is that the president identifies as a high-level solution this.
When will this?
And we can mine the details with the specifics.
When will this affordable petroleum arrive at the pump?
As I mentioned to you, we're going to have the team come and be available and provide those answers.
Okay, when will the team? When will the team?
There's a
be
whole
available?
schedule that will be rolling out of who comes on Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday to provide all of those details. I don't think that we would expect that we dump it all together at a go. We have to take our time and carry the country and everybody along. So that is item number two.
So we haven't. Just a second.
Yeah.
We haven't fixed a date yet where we get. But this you say it's
We haven't fixed a date
a
yet.
date
What we do
for the explanations and the.
I said we have a whole
specifics.
schedule.
Okay.
The address
But-
was
but
only
when-
last night.
I know.
Today,
I
I'm
know.
going around providing
I know.
answers.
I'm asking.
And
I'm asking
saying to
specifics
you,
about.
those are available. We will make them available. And
But
then
I'm
you
asking
know,
when. Do we know?
I'm saying that we'll publish the schedule, and then you know when everybody appears.
Okay.
But I'm saying that there are 12 points that the president has outlined.
Yeah, my job, is to go through them as
And
I
my
hear
job is to provide you the
Yes, and
answers.
so let's go. So
Yeah.
as for the fuel, which
Yeah.
I still insist is the most important
Yeah.
one that needs to be dealt with. As we speak currently, we have to wait for the specifics.
No, I'm telling you that we're going to roll out the schedule, and you have the people like we've done this before.
Okay.
You are pretty
The-
clear.
the
They will
context-
come and provide
The
those details.
context, still
Yeah.
probing that, the context of the current global economy surrounding petroleum products
Yeah.
is different from the time that we went to Nigeria.
Yes.
We have a global crisis
Yes.
around crude generally.
Yes.
Obviously because of Ukraine, Russia, which has sent the prices up. We've seen Shell announce astronomical profits over the last few days,
Yeah.
which means everywhere else, even the most powerful countries,
Yes.
US, UK, are all having the challenges of increase. So where in the world is government going to source affordable petroleum products when everywhere else is expensive?
Well, two things. I'm not going to preempt what the people responsible for the sector are going to do. I've told you that we are scheduling for all of them to come and provide you their detailed presentations. And during those detailed presentations, all of these questions can be put to them. The president has outlined 12 measures, and I'm taking you through those 12 measures. But I find it interesting that you are saying that the cost of living and the fuel prices, and you use the word obviously Russia and Ukraine. I thought that, a few minutes ago we had a presentation that sought to suggest otherwise from
No,
some
it
of
didn't.
really, what did it suggest?
No, it didn't. It says that you cannot dismiss the fact that Russia Ukraine has had an impact, but Ghana's is an outlier in terms of the impact. And in fact, that brings me to a subject of what the president said yesterday, comparing us to other countries in the sub-region on the same point we just made, that Russia and Ukraine. You talk about inflation in some of the neighboring countries. It talks about several folds increase.
Yes.
We drill down the specifics.
Yes.
Ghana is 37%. You mentioned Senegal. They have, increased several folds, but they're currently at 11%.
But where did they come
Percent. No, my point is, if you drill down to the specifics,
where did they
you can talk about folds of increase.
Yeah.
But we are nowhere in terms of the real specifics.
Senegal used to have inflation of Senegal used to have
11%.
Senegal used to have inflation at 1.02%.
Yes.
And now it has gone up to 11.9%.
Yes. But
Okay.
it's in
That
terms
is a
of the fold.
factor increase. I haven't used the word fold.
No, but that's the president. I'm sorry.
No, I'm saying
your own president used the word fold. Fold. Of
I am
increase.
saying
11
you are
fold.
using the word
president,
fold. I'm coming.
The president
I'm saying
used
that's
fold.
a factor increase.
No, just clarify. Just clarify. I'm sure you had a hand in the statement. The president.
You can twist it and make it any way you want. I'm
the
saying
president
to you,
used the
can I
word,
share with you the data?
Mr. Nkrumah, you are the information minister.
Yes.
The president used the words increase, folds of increase. He mentioned the several percentages.
Can I share with you the data I have?
My point to you is that when you talk in those terms, yes, of course, everywhere else, inflation has gone up by several folds. UK is experiencing historical
UK has gone up by a factor increase of 7.84%.
Yes. So my point
from
my
1.3% inflation.
My point is
to
you
10.2%.
You talk about
inflation.
Senegal.
Yes.
At 11%, even where they've increased so much.
11.9% currently.
Yes.
From
Ghana,
1.02%.
we're talking about
Ghana
37.
From 7.14
to 37%.
That's a factor increase of 5.21%.
That's still in real terms.
Statistics we're talking about.
In real terms.
This is statistics we're talking about.
We're talking in real terms.
Yeah.
In real terms, the person on the streets of this country is experiencing more hit in this pocket now compared to the person in Senegal. You can see that.
Can I answer you?
No, I'm just asking a simple question.
Well, I'm answering. It's a simple answer. I'm saying to you that people want to create the impression that the inflation challenge is just a Ghanaian problem. What the president... Can I respond to your question?
Yeah, but nobody has
said that. Can I respond to your question?
Yeah, please.
It's that over and over again. You hear people every now and then make that...
No, nobody has said that it is a uniquely Ghanaian problem.
That, the government wants to blame the inflationary challenge on something that is not necessarily as present on Ghana as it is on others. And I'm saying to you, the data speaks for itself. That inflation in Ghana was at 7.14% in 2019. It's now at 37.2, the highest in about 40 years. That is a factor increase of 5.21%. I'm not sure anybody would dispute that. In Togo, it was 0.5%. It is now at 8%. That is a factor increase of 16%. In Senegal, which we are just talking about, it was 1.02. That's a factor increase of 11.9%. In Cote d'Ivoire, it was 0.81. That's a factor increase of 5.4%.
So question.
What it shows here is that all of these countries we are talking about are seeing the highest inflation in about 40 years. By a factor increase, can I land with
no, but to the question, I think you've made the point.
I haven't made my point. Let me land. I haven't made my point.
I think you've made the point. The president said this yesterday.
I have to answer the question. I have to answer the question.
The president said this yesterday.
I have to answer the question.
My fundamental question.
Can I answer the question?
My fundamental question.
I have to answer the question.
No, but you have answered the question.
I haven't. I'm answering the question.
You said they've increased in folds.
No, I haven't completed my answer. If you let me finish my answer. I am saying to you that the point the president makes with this point is that it is not just a Ghanaian problem. It is a problem.
Let me ask my question now.
Answer the question.
Pull up the graph on the screen for me.
But it is not just a Ghanaian problem.
Yeah, nobody disputes
that. But it is a problem that is manifesting across the world. And then he goes on to say...
No. But before you go on.
Let me just finish my answer.
I think you finished on that.
I haven't finished.
No, you finished.
Let me finish.
Let's drill down. Let's drill down.
He goes on to say...
Let's drill down. No,
when I finish my answer, you can ask me a question.
We had the president yesterday, Mr. Nkrumah.
Well, so then maybe we don't need this interview.
You're quoting from the president.
I am answering your question.
No, but you have.
Let me read to you
the reality of the ground.
In truth, however, the fact that there are petrol queues in France does not make it more tolerable that the trotro price from Kaswa to
but we had We heard the president yesterday. No, but what you're saying is
you're not letting me even
but
finish my sentence.
But here's the question.
You're not letting me finish my sentence.
No, but you have.
If you let, I haven't. I'm midway through my sentence.
So you're reading the president's statement, which we heard yesterday.
I am answering
my
your
question
questions.
to you is: do you concede that? Pull up the graph for me and go on the screen for me. Do you concede that? I'm using Senegal because that's the highest jump in terms of the president's comparison. That the gentleman on the street in Senegal at 11.7%, and the gentleman on the street in Ghana at 37.3%. The gentleman in Ghana has taken a bigger hit to his pocket as a result of inflation than the person you are referring to in Senegal. Do you concede that?
Can I answer your question now? The president has made a clear point that what we are dealing with is not just a Ghanaian problem. It is a problem that is manifested across West Africa and the world, but we have a responsibility to provide answers to it. He has provided 12 different answers aimed at tackling them. And those answers, I have started by telling you, you start off by saying cost of living for you is the biggest. I actually agree with you. It is the biggest. He's rolled out a solution to that. Another challenge.
I'll come to that, Mr. Ponkroma. I'll come to that because I will go to that, not you, unfortunately.
Oh, really?
So final question on this. Final question on this. Are you saying to the ordinary man on the street bearing 37% inflation that his pain is equal to the 11.9% person in Senegal? Is that what you're telling the guy?
I don't think that I have said anything to that effect.
I'm asking a question.
I said I haven't said anything to that effect. It surprises me how you come to that conclusion.
So the only point...
What I have said is that the president's point is simple, that the challenge we're experiencing is not peculiarly a Ghanaian challenge. Yeah. It is global.
But it doesn't matter to the president.
However, we are responding. What are the response mechanisms?
I'll come to that. But it doesn't matter to the president.
You don't appear interested in the solutions.
I'll come to that. Yeah. It doesn't matter to the president that, yes, everywhere else is experiencing inflation, but my people, compared to the three countries you mentioned, are suffering far more. Let me land my question.
Oh, really? You want to land?
Yes, because I have to answer.
You want to land, but I don't land when I answer the question.
Fortunately for me,
no.
That doesn't matter.
If it didn't matter to the president, if it didn't matter to the,
let me finish my question.
But you don't let me finish my answers. If it didn't matter to the president, if it didn't matter to the president, we will not be introducing the measures that we are introducing.
The president's first line of argument is correct, that everybody else across the globe is experiencing some form of inflationary pressures.
Yes.
My people, in comparison to all those other countries you mentioned, are experiencing far more pain in comparison to all those other countries.
I'm saying that if it did not
matter to him?
I'm saying that if it did not matter to the president, he would not be introducing these measures that he's introducing. It is precisely because it matters to the president that he's outlined these 12 measures, which he's hopeful we will all join.
Let's go to the second. Let's go to the second.
You won't even let me finish my answer.
Okay, but you just going to
I am
measures.
Not done. You won't let me finish.
You mentioned measures.
You asked me a question. Let me finish. I'm saying that because it is relevant to the president, that's why he's introduced these measures, which he's expecting that all of us will rally around and support him to implement.
So let's go to the next measure. We plan to reduce our total public debt to GDP ratio to some 55%.
Yeah.
In present value terms by 2028. Is it one of the big ones?
Well, for me, one of the biggest ones is the effort to reduce the availability of Forex.
No, I'll come to that. I'm asking,
you asked me, is it one of the big ones?
No,
and I'm telling you what I consider as one of the biggest ones.
This is one of the big ones. Let me ask you a question.
Well, I'm answering your question.
I'll come to that.
That one of the big ones.
No, you introduced a new measure.
No, I'm not. You asked me, is it one of the big ones? And I'm telling you that one of the big ones.
So you disagree?
Is the availability of Forex.
I'll come to that as a substantive question.
To ensure that we import essentials.
So the president said yesterday.
And de-emphasize
yes, so I'll come to that. The president said yesterday, and because it's a big one because you're talking to the IMF and debt is an issue.
Yeah.
We plan to reduce our total public debt to GDP ratio by 55% in present value terms by 2028.
Yeah.
So this promise will fully materialize in 6 years from what the president has said. Mm-hmm. The president will be in charge of the economy for 2 of these 6 years.
Yeah.
So what precise percentage is the president committing himself to reduce the debt by in these 2 years when he's still in charge?
The finance ministry has come to parliament in the middle of November. and is going to present what we call the fiscal adjustment strategy. That fiscal adjustment strategy, which we've already agreed on with the IMF, is a strategy that moves us from currently where we are about 73%. And then if you add onto it the contingent liabilities, there are those who say it's somewhere around 104. That strategy is what maps out the path that brings us from there to 55% by 2028. And it has a year-on-year target that is supposed to be achieved. All of those details are going to be put out by the 15th of November when the finance minister appears before Parliament to present it before the House. What the president did was to answer the big question of, if we have a debt overhang, how do we deal with it? And especially now that we've arrived on that as part of a fiscal adjustment strategy with the fund, what the president did was to announce it to the country that this is one of the things we have agreed upon. What it will do is that it will help free up fiscal space for us to be able to invest in the things that we desire.
So in the budget, we'll get to know in the next 2 years that he's in charge, how much of that reduction he will be responsible for.
Year by year.
Okay. Another big one, and the president reserved this for last, and he was very emphatic on this, talking about no haircuts. He assured the Ghanaians that no individual institutional investor, including pension funds and government treasury bills instruments, will lose their money as a result of the ongoing IMF negotiations. Clarify for me when he says no haircuts. Is that categorically asserting that there will be no debt restructuring?
Haircut is not synonymous for debt restructuring.
That's my question. So explain that for me when he says.
First of all, haircut,
is that what he means?
No, I'm coming. That cannot be what he means, because haircut is not synonymous to debt restructuring. Debt restructuring is a broader exercise. There are some times where debt restructuring requires a haircut, and usually when you say a haircut, it means principal haircut. I watched my friend Ato Forson's presentation with John Dramani Mahama a couple of days ago, the former president, and he was categorical, principal haircuts. Now, there are various ways of dealing with debt restructuring. There are some where you go for haircuts, there are some where you go for reprofiling, there are some where you go for elongation of tenors, etc. Now, government had not announced anything. What happened was that speculation started, and indeed some persons took the speculation to another level by attempting now to be categorical and talking about principal haircuts. And the president was quite clear that that is not going to happen.
So principals will not be touched, but that means a host of things could still is in play, which is extension of maturities, renegotiation of interests.
There are various options.
Are still on the table.
There are various options. The details of the strategy have not been announced. They will be announced. There was specific speculation that the president was dealing with, and that's what he spoke to.
So this specifically is on haircuts, but on the table still are possible renegotiation of maturity days, which could be extended, and also interest rates could be renegotiated downwards. That is on the table.
Those details will be announced later.
Okay, so what it means is that this categorically doesn't mean that we're not going to have debt restructuring.
I have said that no haircut is not equal to no debt restructuring. Yeah. Debt restructuring includes a number of things. If you're going to bring your debt down to 55% of GDP, obviously you're going to restructure it. And the details of that will be announced. But what the president sought to deal with is the speculation that had been put on the market that there were going to be haircuts.
In idea when we'll get to know the details of it?
Again, I think that in the next couple of weeks, we should have the details of that strategy announced. I suspect it to be done before budget. That's my suspicion.
Is the debt sustainability analysis done now?
It's done now.
It's done now.
Yeah.
And this should be in the budget also?
I expect the details to be in the budget, but I am hoping that it will be announced before we go to the budget itself, so that we have time to focus on the budget itself and not mix it with all of these other things that come along at the time.
Okay. There's another key issue the president talked about yesterday, which is that we have decided to continue the policy of 30% cuts.
Yeah.
This is part of the bigger thing that was announced earlier in the year, 30% cut in salaries of political office holders.
Yes.
Including...
And 30% cut in discretionary budgetary spending.
Including your own salary. Yeah. It has been several months.
No, my salary is not included.
But I thought you were, 30% salaries of political office holders. Political office holders, you include a political office holder?
No, it doesn't affect members of parliament, for example.
Well, as a minister,
I don't get paid as a minister. I get paid zero as a minister.
Okay, so your parliamentary
100%,
salary is...
So I have 100% cut on whatever was supposed to be my top-up. I don't get it.
Okay, so what it means, as a member of parliament, if you become a minister of state,
you don't get a top-up.
You get a top-up, so you don't get. But the fundamental question, it's been several months since these cuts in salaries was announced.
Yeah.
How much exactly has accrued as a result of the cuts?
This morning I was mentioning that the finance ministry at some point will have to put that figure out. But even before they do, you can look to the deficit for the first half of the year as has been presented to Parliament. And it gives you an idea that if that 30% of discretionary expenditure had not been cut, we will not be achieving this on-target deficit that we have. But I agree the finance ministry at some point will have to put out those figures. I think by the end of the year, when the outturns for 2022 are ready and they are announcing the 2023 budget, you should see how much has been saved from discretionary budget expenditure when 30% was cut.
Considering, Mr. Ponkrumah, that this is one of the measures, thankfully, that has been on the books and is being implemented for at least 5 months, if I'm not mistaken, and you've gone to a cabinet retreat several times in that period. We're speaking on the night after the president spoke, and you still can't tell us how much exactly you save from the 30% cut.
In nominal terms, I don't have the figure with me, but what I'm drawing your attention to is that if you look at the deficit for even first half of the year or as at September, it tells you clearly what has been achieved with that 30% cut. Without that 30% cut on discretionary budget expenditure and that 30% cut on the salaries of the president, vice president, ministers, and other government appointees, you will not be achieving that particular number. And I'm saying to you that when the outturns come before Parliament, you see the details.
Yeah, but that doesn't address a fundamental question. That for a policy that has been implemented since March, at least when the finance minister announced this, when the president then decides to include it in his crisis speech, and we still don't know yet, or the information minister can't tell us tonight, how much has been saved in those 5 months, it's not acceptable.
To you. But I have told you that in all of the 12 measures, these highlights have been mentioned. The details will be provided by the various persons responsible as they rise up to the podium. There are details, for example, you're asking me fuel pricing, when, where. I've told you that those details are going to be provided by Energy and MP and those who are handling it. You're asking me for a specific figure. I'm telling you that, yes, finance should be able to put it up. But when they bring the details before Parliament,
the difference
before Parliament,
you know the difference between, the reason I'm now asking this question of this, the difference between the other ones and this. The other ones are in the future.
Yeah.
Some things you intend to do, you're beginning. So I mean, I can't hold you to that because you will know, because it's still happening. But for something that you've been implementing since March, you have cut 30%, hard figure. The president has talked about it last night. We sit here tonight, and it's a fundamental question you don't know. That then raises questions.
You can go on for 35 minutes about that. It won't change the fact that the finance minister will provide those details. I don't have those details. You can go round and round. I don't have those details.
Do you know what that money has been used for?
Good. So there are two ways of doing that. There are those who say, pay it, withdraw it, put it in an account and use it for something else. There are those who say, don't pay it, leave it in the consolidated fund, in the fungible flow, and it can be drawn on for anything else. In our case, it was not paid in the first place to be drawn out and used for something else. It was left in the consolidated fund, unpaid. And so it will not be possible to say it was used for this or that or that. When you leave money in the consolidated fund, money is fungible, it is drawn for various other purposes. So that question about what was it used for is not a question that this administration is going to be answering, because we did not set it out apart to use for something else. I hope you understand me.
Okay, so as we speak currently, specifically, yes, we've made some savings, as you're pointing to. In terms of real tangible application of that saving, do we know?
It was not intended that the money will be taken out of the consolidated fund and used for something.
It goes back for everything.
No,
else.
It doesn't go back. It doesn't even come out of the consolidated fund. It stays there. Okay. And so you will not be able to point to something. This is the difference between what we did and what the previous administration did, where they took it out ostensibly to use for something else.
Another intervention that was announced by the president, and I want to quote this because I must admit it confused me a bit, because I wanted clarity, which is why you're here. We will review standards required for imports into the country, prioritize imports, as well as review the management of our foreign exchange reserves in relation to imports of products such as rice, poultry, vegetable oil, toothpicks, a whole host of things, with intensified government support and that of banking sector, can be manufactured and produced in sufficient quantities in Ghana. What does this mean?
In my view, this is one of the biggest announcements of the night. It is one of the biggest things that would ensure, first of all, that we better manage our foreign exchange reserves. 2, we cut down on imports that are not very necessary. 3, we boost local production. As a first step, what the central bank is doing with the banks is to limit the availability of forex for the importation of some of these items that have been mentioned. Rice, poultry, vegetable oil, fruit juices, etc. as a first step.
So you're limiting, not cutting.
Limiting the availability of forex for these.
By how much?
Again, the BOG, when they publish the details, you will find those details in there. The second is that we are working to boost local production, and that's where he mentions working with the local system to boost local production. Because if you do not take care and you cut it off at a go, you may create shortages on the market that will lead to a further increase in the prices. And so we are working to boost local production. The president also mentions that in about 6 months' time, we have an opportunity to review. I know that one of the things that is being considered for that review is the possibility of a ban. There are a lot of people who are advocating for a ban on some of these items. But you need to give it some time to boost local production, which also helps you to rationalize your forex utilization. And when you get to that point where local production has been significantly boosted, you can take the next consequential steps.
Okay, so as we speak currently, if you are importing fruit juice, bottled water, vegetable oil...
Start thinking about producing them here in Ghana.
Okay, because the central bank won't be giving you what
all you prioritizing the availability of forex in that way. No, we'll not be doing that.
The black market guys will be smiling all the way to the bank.
Which black market guys?
Oh, the guys who were selling the dollar on the black market.
Well, so you'll notice that there's a part of the strategy that talks about clamping down on the forex trade in this country, which is a combination of the black market, the rates, speculation, even the domiciliation of forex into the Ghanaian economy. I think on that part, it was a bit more elaborate with what needs to be done to ensure that we domiciliate forex into the Ghanaian jurisdiction. The mix of those efforts are supposed to ensure that those who need forex for legitimate purposes will find it in the banks or the forex bureaus for those purposes, and we can tone down on the speculation and the other things on the sites.
Okay, so when you say those who need, what are you prioritizing then?
Well, we are not making things like rice, poultry, vegetable oil, fruit juices a priority, but things like petroleum products, things like medicines, and other essential commodities are things that we will be looking to ensure that they get what they require. If somebody wants to buy dollar and keep at home, somebody wants to buy forex and hold on to it, those are not things that we are prioritizing.
Let's talk about another. This is going to last for how long, though? By the way, is there a timeline to this, or this is?
Well, we're starting with we're starting with the first 6-month period. In 6 months, we will review, and then we will take some longer-lasting decisions on how to make that permanent. Okay. Because it is a necessary part of our economic policy. You can build all the 1D1Fs that you want, but if the market is still overly accessible to cheaper imports, some of your local production plants will be sitting down. Wilma, for example, which produces fried oil, if you would recall, I think for about a year now, has suspended production because there are cheaper options that are coming from other parts of the world. So when you implement a strategy like this, you make it possible for the local producers to show up, and on a permanent basis, they now control the market.
You also announced, and this is one of the areas that had been consistently a challenge for us in dealing with our deficit revenue collection.
Yep.
You want to improve your revenue collection from
13.
Current, GDP ratio of 13% to about 18
to 19, 20 thereabouts.
To be competitive with the peers in the West African sub-region. First of all, there's no timeline to this. When do you want to achieve this?
Well, we are expecting that in this 2023 budget, you will see the first signal. So moving from 13 to what? And then to what the next year and to what the third year. I've told you that there is a fiscal adjustment strategy, and this forms all part of it, the details of which will be put out by the finance minister when it comes before Parliament.
Okay, and how do you plan to do this, achieve this target exactly?
There are a number of revenue measures, some of which you hinted at that had not been successfully implemented. There are a number of revenue measures that will support this 13 move to about 18, 20. The good thing is that the fund has had the opportunity to examine them and has admitted into the fiscal framework the ones that they are of the view are achievable, the ones that they are of the view are not achievable, they have not included in that fiscal framework. So when you look at the outturns, for example, of revenue to external debt servicing ratio of about 18%, there's clarity on what goes into it. Again, all of that is going to be announced. I saw, some of your pundits suggest that it's not possible, it's not doable, etc. I don't want to preempt all of those ones. When the details are offloaded, November 15th, which spells out the specific revenue measures, we'll have an opportunity to examine them one by one, which ones are feasible, which ones are not.
You said November 15,
yeah.
And of course the Constitution has a role to play in that number you throw up in terms of reading the budget. But if I take the President's word, a lot will depend on reaching some form of staff agreement with the IMF.
The staff level agreement.
Staff level agreement.
The staff level agreement will come after November. It will probably come somewhere in December. November 15th is whereby the Public Financial Management Act, not the Constitution, you are required to come to Parliament to lay the budget, and then you have appropriation follow. Now, once you lock in some of these low-level agreements we have with the fund, then you're going to hope that their final mission will be successful, and then they'll proceed to sign a staff-level agreement with you before they go to board to get board approval to bless it. And then from early next year, you can get the disbursement and then the crowding in of the funds.
But in terms of the way it works, if November 15 you're going to stick to that hard date, would you have reached a point in the conversation with the IMF that then gives you enough specifics to include or not to include?
We have those specifics. Those are the specifics that the President has outlined here. The negotiations, and I hear people say it's not going well, the IMF is not happy. It's all not true. Some of these numbers that the President is talking about, 55% by 2028, 13 to 1890, these are low-level agreements we have with the fund on the fiscal adjustment and then on the debt program, which are the things that we are moving to lock in into our 2023 budget, even before the third mission comes to town. And then it constitutes some sort of prior actions that they would have seen we are clear on taking, which will hopefully lead to the success of that mission, lead to a staff level agreement, and then we can go to the board.
Is government alive to the reality that you can get a staff level agreement, but an executive board agreement could take longer and in most cases dependent on your ability to prove that your debt is sustainable?
Government has not said anywhere that a staff level agreement is equal to a board approval. That's the first point. Second point is that there are people, and I've noticed from Saturday on your network, there are people who are very delighted in making a certain submission that it's not possible, it can't be done. You know, when you get a staff level agreement, it doesn't mean you have a board. It's like people are wishing the thing will fail.
No, I mean, but that's just stating facts, right? That
Can I
getting
answer?
Staff level,
Can I answer?
It's not to matter you get.
Nobody has said that getting staff level is equal to board. Yeah. But it appears that there are people who are just wishing that the thing will fail. And I'm saying that I've watched some of them right here on your network. But we are clear in our minds that a staff level agreement is somewhere in December. And that it is after that staff level agreement that the staff will take the agreement to the board and make a justification to the board on behalf of Ghana. And our expectation is that the way we are going, when it gets to the board, by the time we are clear with an SLA, we should get board approval.
Yeah, but I asked you whether government is alive to the fact that that executive board agreement, most often than not, is dependent on proving that your debt is sustainable.
And I'm saying to you that the debt program, bringing it down to 55% by 2028 with a clear debt path, has already been sorted out, which is what is going to be presented before Parliament as part of this budget program. Now, if you have done all of those ones based on what you've negotiated with the fund, and they and they ensure that it has been done, it has been legislated, it is part of your 2023 budget and MTEF, then you have clarity that this staff level agreement is standing on something. It's not an agreement that you are now going to implement.
I'm yet to see an IMF program that lasts for 6 years.
Nobody has said the program lasts for 6 years.
No, but you're saying that this 2028 target is all part of what.
It doesn't mean the program lasts for 6 years.
So maximum.
If you looked at the 2013-2014 program, there were targets that were more than the 3-year program itself. The fact that targets have been set out there does not mean that the program exists to the tenor of those targets. So the fact that you are locking in a debt program which seeks to achieve a 55% by two, and that's one of the mistakes that my friend, the Honorable Atuforsen makes. Because I've watched his lectures, quote unquote, I follow some of his analysis. He seeks to suggest that bringing the debt to 55% means that you must shave off that extra percentage. He talks about 200 billion at a go. And that if you don't do that at a go, the fund will not sign you on. That's a total misunderstanding of debt restructuring.
Yeah, I've listened to him. I don't think he suggested
That is what is you can watch.
You have to show
You can watch
that you can cut
You can
this down.
watch his presentation with the former President Mahama. He makes the point that you have to shave off, those are his words, about 200. You don't have to shave off 200 billion at a go. You have to have a program that brings your debt burden down over a period. And the fact that the target is over 6 years does not mean that the fund program
Mr.
itself
Ponkrumah,
is a 6-year program.
Fundamental to the debt being sustainable is debt restructuring. You've talked about the separation, so that is interesting.
Yeah.
But then you know that to make it sustainable, you must reach an agreement with your investors, right? With your investors. You haven't even begun a conversation with your investors yet. So how are you able to say so confidently that you've already at least seen a certain path end of the tunnel that allows the executive board looking at your debt being sustainable, primarily based on the debt restructuring, to give you a deal? Because that agreement hasn't been reached. You haven't even started a conversation.
Have you followed how the Jamaican debt restructuring was done in 2010?
No, I have followed Zambia, which is much closer to us.
Have you followed how the Dubai one was done in about 2014?
Well, I follow Zambia, which is much closer to us.
Well, have you followed how the Latin American debt was restructured?
Well, I repeat that. I follow Zambia, which is much closer in similarity to
So
what
I've
we're
given
dealing
you
with.
3 examples. You have one. I'm saying to you that what you're saying is not correct. That is not how it's always done. There are many instances in which you have, sometimes you have collective action clauses that trigger in the process. There are many instances in which sometimes you have to demonstrate with groups of investors where you are going. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Either way, Mr. Ponkrumah,
I
the
don't have
IMF
to-
is clear. The IMF have a whole document detailing how this happened. You can never achieve this without some form of agreement.
It's like you are
with
wishing it will
investors.
fail.
No, I'm asking a question.
Are you one of those wishing it will fail?
I don't know when since the question became a statement.
So I am
The IMF
saying to
has
you,
a clear
I am
guideline
saying to you,
on how this is
we
done.
have been sitting with the IMF.
Yeah.
I was in Washington with George Biafi, your reporter.
Yeah.
We've been sitting with the IMF.
You're saying-
and going
I mean,
through.
just for
Can I
clarity.
answer you? I've not even answered you.
Just for clarity, are you saying that you're achieving the debt restructuring without an agreement with investors, whether a group or
I am
individuals or
saying to you,
institutions?
my brother Evans, that the debt restructuring program details will be put out. And we have arrived at this point because we have sat with the fund, we have clarity on what it takes to get to those targets. And when the details are put out, you will see clearly how it is brought to sustainable limits and by what time. We are clear in our minds after our negotiations with the fund what needs to be done and when. And I'm saying to you, let's give them the opportunity to do their work.
That's Kojo Ponkrumah. He is the Information Minister. I'm delighted that you joined us, Mr. Ponkrumah. Thank you very much.
You have a good evening.
Enjoy the rest of your evening.